What is a feudal state? A feudal state is one where you have multiple layers of citizenship, quote and unquote, or if you will, membership, where the law does not rule. Because if the law should rule, you would have equality before the law. And equality before the law would suggest that everybody get treated the same. This is incompatible with a feudal state. So Nigeria is essentially a state with multiple levels of membership and multiple levels or systems of justice or administration of injustice, if you will. But we didn't get to where we are by accident. There is a historic origin for where we are. The Yorubas have a proverb. They say, if a child does not live to witness history, then he must at least be the beneficiary of oral history. And that history is the father of all history. I, on the other hand, I benefited from divinely failing my JAMB exam multiple times, so I had to read government and history multiple times. So I was forced to study the history of Nigeria. In my time in secondary school, we were taught the constitutional development of Nigeria. That meant you had to learn constitutional history. So by the time I was in the university, before I even got into the university, having learned A-level government, I had become something of a prodigy when it came to constitutional history of Nigeria. So I know what I am talking about. Before the coming of the British, because this is where we must go to find the origins. Before the coming of the British in what we generally refer to as northern Nigeria today, we had the Kanem Bonu Empire and you had the Sokoto Caliphate. Long before the Sokoto Caliphate, you had the Hausa kings. Some of you would have learnt elementary history where they would have taught you about the Abe kings and the Bokoi. But whatever that is, important thing is that before there was a Sokoto Caliphate, there were independent Hausa states. These independent Hausa states were loosely, maybe like you can refer to them as something of a confederacy, but the most important thing you must understand is that these were kingdoms, pretty much like Yorubas had kingdoms, preeminent ones being the Oyo Empire. The important thing is that before the British came, we were governed by systems. Northern Nigeria was largely governed by feudalism. The Yoruba kings were not absolute monarchs. Their powers were limited. And we had systems of checks and balances. So they didn't have the same kind of power that the Sokoto Caliphate, the caliphs, the Shehu of Borno, for instance, had. Those were absolute monarchs. But because they ran theocracies, which lent itself more readily to the feudal system, you had highly systemized feudal states in northern Nigeria. By the time the British came, you already know the story of indirect rule. They took what was the most successful governance model existing in a space and layered their suzerainty on top of that, so that they didn't have to deploy so much human resource. So here is what happened. By the time the British came, even the parts of the north that had not been conquered by any of the Islamic kingdoms were brought under the suzerainty of the Islamic empires. So you had a situation where kingdoms and ethnic groups in most part of the northwest, the north central, the northeast, which went with the Shehu of Borno, what you essentially had was a situation where the lesser kingdoms, the smaller kingdoms were brought under centralized authority, where you had the native authority and all of that. Important thing is that feudalism ruled essentially in the north, propped up by the British in the southwest, in what was once the west. In the west, you had Yoruba monarchs with limited powers, and you had decades of a civil war in Yoruba land. It was very easy to just lump everybody under the Halafin. He was the preeminent Yoruba ruler, but he was not ruling everybody. There were independent kingdoms that had broken away from Oyo control. But because it was convenient for the British, everybody came back again under the Oyo. Promoted the Oni as the spiritual head, promoted the Oyo, the Alafin of Oyo, as the sovereign in Yoruba land, and of course, he was the one who signed all the pre-colonization papers, the treaties and all of that, where we were supposed to have been traded away to the British crown. Important thing is this: the Europeans, particularly Lord Lugard, felt comfortable with denying citizenship, note it, to those that they brought under their rule. All they had to do was deal with those they've recognized as sovereign over the people, and this formed the foundation of the feudal state that we have today. Because unlike other countries, where states were started with the supremacy of citizenship or evolved, if you look at European history, you'd find that feudalism was part and parcel of what was already in the place, but citizenship evolved, came out of the serfs as the Bill of Rights was signed, as the Magna Carta was signed, as the French Revolution happened, as the Habsburg Empire was broken. Different events, the 1917 revolution in Russia, different events led to the emergence of citizenship and the rule of law in Europe. America took it a step further when it declared the universal equality of all men, fought a civil war, and predicated a country on the back of citizenship. That was the apogee of the idea of citizenship, even though it emerged out of ancient Rome. The important thing I'm trying to do is lay the theoretical foundation so that you begin to understand clearly that there is a world of difference between being called a citizen and being citizens. There is also a world of difference between declaring a country to be democratic and it being in reality a feudal state. Now, our feudal state has its root in our colonial history. But it was always up to us. It was always up to us to either embrace this feudalism or to nod it off.